Pack your things and get out of my kitchen. This is my house now. That's what my daughter-in-law said to me on the morning of my 68th birthday. Not a joke. Not a misunderstanding. She stood there in my kitchen. The kitchen where I had cooked every Thanksgiving dinner for 31 years. And she said those words to my face like she had every right in the world to say them. I want to tell you what happened. All of it. Because I've been carrying this story for 2 years, and I think it's time people heard it. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 68 years old. I'm a retired civil engineer, and I own a 4-bedroom colonial in Raleigh, North Carolina, that I paid off in full in 2019. My wife, Loretta, God rest her soul. And I bought that house in 1991 when our son was just 3 years old. We planted the oak tree in the front yard together. We painted the hallway 3 times before we found a color we both liked. Every corner of that house has a memory in it. When Loretta passed from cancer 6 years ago, I stayed. Some people said I should sell and move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. But I couldn't do it. That house was the last place she was whole. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is to me, regardless of everything that happened. He's 41 now. He works in commercial real estate. Smart man. Always was. But somewhere along the way, he married a woman who had a very particular idea of how life should look, and unfortunately, that idea involved my house, my savings, and my gradual disappearance. My daughter-in-law, I'll call her what she is, came into our lives about 9 years ago. She was charming at first. Very charming. The kind of charming that you recognize only in hindsight as performance. She remembered birthdays. She brought wine to dinners. She called me by a warm nickname that made me feel included. I liked her. I want to be honest about that. For the first 2 or 3 years, I genuinely liked her. The changes were so slow I almost didn't notice them. It started with small things. She began referring to my house as the family home in conversation, which sounded generous at first, inclusive even, until I realized she was using that phrase to make decisions. We should really update the family home's kitchen. The family home needs a new roof and we should all contribute. I let it go. I told myself she was just enthusiastic, just trying to be part of something. Then my son's business had a difficult year. 2021 was hard for a lot of people, and commercial real estate took hits in ways nobody anticipated. He came to me privately one evening and asked if they could move in temporarily. 6 months, he said, just to stabilize. I said yes without hesitation. He's my son. Of course I said yes. 6 months became 14 months, and somewhere in that 14 months, the atmosphere in my own house shifted in a way that is genuinely difficult to describe. My daughter-in-law began operating as though the house was hers, not aggressively at first. Gradually, she rearranged the living room furniture without asking. She replaced my coffee maker with one she preferred. She put her name on the Amazon account linked to my address and began having packages delivered daily. Boxes stacked in the entryway like she was running a business out of my foyer. When I mentioned it, she smiled and said she was just making the space work better for everyone. My grandson was born that year. He was born in February, and I was at the hospital within an hour of getting the call. I held him the day he came home. He has his grandmother's eyes, I think, or maybe I just want that to be true. Either way, he became the reason I held my tongue longer than I should have. I didn't want to make things difficult. I didn't want my grandson to grow up in the middle of conflict. So I accommodated. I stepped back. I gave them space. I ate dinner in my own home on a schedule that fit around her preferences. I stopped inviting my friends over because she made it clear she found it disruptive. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound like a saint. I made mistakes. I was too quiet for too long. A man with more backbone would have drawn a line much earlier. But I loved my son, and I adored my grandson, and I kept telling myself things would normalize. They did not normalize. By the second year, my daughter-in-law had stopped pretending the accommodations were temporary. She repainted 2 bedrooms without asking me. She hired a contractor to redo the master bathroom, not the bathroom they were using, mine, and presented me with a bill for $3,000 as my share. When I said I hadn't agreed to the renovation, she looked at me with the kind of patience you show, a confused elderly man, and said that the house needed updating, and that I should be grateful. My son sat next to her and said nothing. That silence from my son, that is the part that hurt the most, if I'm being honest. A renovation I didn't ask for, I could have argued about. But watching my son sit there like a man who'd forgotten who raised him, that cut somewhere deeper than I knew I could still be cut. I started paying attention differently after that. Not out of suspicion exactly, more out of self-preservation. I began going through my own financial statements carefully for the first time in years. I'd always been loose about that, trusting systems I'd set up, not checking details. What I found wasn't fraud exactly. It was more like slow erosion. I had added my son as a secondary contact on a joint household account years ago during a medical scare, just in case something happened to me. That account had been used significantly. Groceries I could understand, but there were charges to furniture stores, a subscription to a design service, a payment to a travel agency for a trip I was never told about. Small amounts individually. Together over 18 months, they added up to something that made me sit very still at my kitchen table for a long time. I did not confront them. Not yet. Instead, I made an appointment with my attorney, a woman I've worked with for over a decade. I told her everything. She was not surprised in the way that told me this was not an unusual story for her to hear. We talked for 2 hours. She advised me clearly and carefully, and I left her office with a plan. I also left with the understanding that I had to be patient. I had to let things continue appearing normal while I got my affairs in order. I separated my accounts. I changed the secondary contact. I had my will reviewed. I spoke with a financial advisor about the property specifically and confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine, unambiguously and entirely, with no legal claim belonging to anyone else. And then I waited. My 68th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. My son asked a few weeks before what I wanted to do. I said I'd like a quiet dinner at home, maybe invite a couple of my old friends, keep it simple. He nodded, said that sounded great. I found out the Wednesday before that my daughter-in-law had invited 14 people, her parents, her sister's family, several of her friends, and had contacted a catering company to take over the kitchen for the day. When I asked my son about it, he said she just wanted to do something special. When I said I'd asked for something quiet, he looked uncomfortable and said it would be fine, that I should just enjoy it. I said I would handle it. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs at 7:30 to find my daughter-in-law already reorganizing the refrigerator to make room for the catering delivery. She had moved things from my kitchen to make space, stacked items on the counter, was directing all of this with the energy of a woman in her own home hosting her own event. She saw me come in and said, without looking up, "You can take your breakfast in the sitting room today. We need the kitchen clear by 9. I stood there for a moment. Then I said calmly, "I'm sorry." She looked at me then, and that's when she said it, "Pack your things and get out of my kitchen. This is my house now." I believe she meant my kitchen in the moment. I believe it was a slip of frustration. But a slip reveals what's underneath, and what was underneath had been building for 2 years. I looked at her. I said nothing. I walked upstairs and I called my attorney. She had told me months earlier that when I was ready, I could proceed. I told her I was ready. I also called my 2 oldest friends, men I've known since we were all young engineers at the same firm, and I told them to come over. Not for the party. I needed witnesses, and I needed people who knew me. My daughter-in-law's guests began arriving at noon. The caterers set up in my dining room. There was music. There were flower arrangements she'd apparently ordered. My son moved through it all, looking proud of himself in the way men do when they've outsourced a problem to someone more capable than them. At 2 in the afternoon, when the house was full and the party was in full swing, I walked into the dining room and I asked for everyone's attention. My daughter-in-law saw my face, and something in her expression shifted. She knew. I don't know exactly what she knew, but something in my posture or my stillness told her that the afternoon was about to change. I thanked everyone for coming. I said I wanted to share a few things about the house they were standing in. I told them about buying it with my wife in 1991. I told them about raising my son in it. I told them that I'd paid off the mortgage in 2019, and that the deed was in my name alone. I said this clearly and without drama, the way you state facts. Then I told my son and my daughter-in-law that I would need them to begin making arrangements to leave. I gave them 30 days. The room was very quiet. My daughter-in-law laughed first, the sharp kind of laugh that isn't actually a laugh. She said I couldn't be serious. She said after everything they'd done to maintain the house, after everything they'd contributed. I asked her, politely, to tell me specifically what she had contributed to a house she never paid rent on, and I watched her face work through several expressions before she found anger. My son tried, I'll give him that. He pulled me aside and asked me what I was doing. He said this was embarrassing. He said I was making a scene at my own birthday. I told him that his wife had told me to get out of my own kitchen that morning. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he also knew that was true. He heard it. He said they had nowhere to go on 30 days' notice. I reminded him that 9 years ago he'd married into a family with a home of their own in Kerry. He was quiet about that. The guests left quickly. Caterers packed up. My 2 friends stayed, and we sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, and I made us coffee, and we talked until 8 o'clock that evening. The 30 days were uncomfortable in the way that all necessary things are uncomfortable. My son spoke to me minimally. My daughter-in-law did not speak to me at all, which was honestly a relief. I spent time with my grandson every day because whatever was happening between the adults had nothing to do with him, and I made certain he knew that Grandpa was still Grandpa. The day they moved out, my son stopped in the doorway with 2 bags in his hands. He looked at me for a moment. I thought he might say something angry. Instead, he said he was sorry. Just those 3 words. I don't know exactly what he meant by them. Sorry for that morning. Sorry for 2 years. Sorry for the marriage he built that required a scaffold made of my life. But he said them. I told him I loved him. Because I do. That's not something that turns off. We have a relationship now. It's different. He and his wife are renting an apartment in Durham, and from what I understand, things between them are not particularly easy. I don't celebrate that. I have my grandson every other weekend, and we do what grandfathers and grandsons do. We build things, we watch games, we eat too much, and keep it between us. He's 4 now. He won't remember any of this. I changed the locks the weekend after they left, repainted the hallway back to the color Loretta, and I chose together 20 years ago. Moved my furniture back to where I'd always kept it, put my coffee maker back in its spot. Standing in my kitchen that first morning alone, drinking coffee in the quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. I felt like I was home. And if you're listening to this and you're in a situation where someone has slowly made you a guest in your own life, in your own home, at your own table, I want you to hear this clearly. The house is yours. The table is yours. The quiet on a Saturday morning is yours. You don't have to raise your voice to take it back. You just have to be ready. Where are you listening from, and what would you have done in my place? I keep thinking about that kitchen. Not the argument, not the words she said, but the quiet afterward. The way the room felt when it was just mine again. Coffee in my own mug. Light coming through the window the same way it had for 30 years, and nobody telling me where I was or wasn't allowed to stand. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting so long. 2 years is a long time to let something like that go on. And honestly, there are moments I do. There are moments I wish I'd drawn the line the first time she rearranged my living room without asking, or the first time my son sat next to her and said nothing when he should have said something. But I also know that I wasn't ready then. Ready isn't just about anger. Ready is about knowing exactly what you're doing and why, and being willing to live with the outcome. I wasn't there yet. What I learned, and I mean really learned. Not the kind you read in books, but the kind that settles into your bones after you've lived it. Is that how we treat people compounds over time? The same way money does in a bank. Every small cruelty, every dismissal, every moment of taking someone for granted without consequence, those don't disappear. They accumulate, and eventually the account comes due. My daughter-in-law didn't lose that house in one dramatic moment. She lost it slowly, over 24 months of small decisions that each said the same thing. The man who owns this place doesn't matter. That's not a story that ends well for the person making those decisions. It never does. I'm not a perfect man. I was too accommodating for too long, and that's on me. But I want to be clear about something. Staying calm is not the same as being weak. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't argue at the dinner table or send threatening messages or make speeches nobody asked for. It just watches and thinks and waits until it knows exactly where to put its foot down. That's the kind of strength I had to find in myself during those 2 years. Not the strength to fight, the strength to be patient with a plan. And my son, that's the complicated part. I love him. That's not something I say to wrap the story up neatly. It's just true, the way gravity is true. But love doesn't mean accepting whatever someone puts in front of you under the name of family. Part of loving someone is refusing to let them become a person you can't respect. When he said he was sorry in that doorway, I believed him. And I also knew that the sorry meant more, because it cost him something. Easy apologies don't stick. The ones that come after real consequences, those are the ones people actually carry with them. My grandson is 4. He won't remember any of this, and that's fine. What he'll know, when he's old enough to know anything about me, is that his grandfather kept a steady house. That when things got hard, I didn't fold or flee or beg. That I handled it. There's something I hope he absorbs from that, without ever having to be told. The understanding that your integrity is the one thing nobody can take from you, and that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the ones who have already decided everything. The oak tree Loretta and I planted in the front yard is tall now. I look at it some mornings and think about how long it took to get that way. Nothing worthwhile grows fast. Not trees. Not the kind of person you want to be.